My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 73 years old now. There are certain sounds that stay with you long after the moment passes. Footsteps in a hallway, a door closing a little too softly, the low hum of a refrigerator in the middle of the night, and sometimes a phone ringing. I don't hear it often anymore. My house is quiet these days, too quiet most mornings. But every now and then, usually when the light is fading and the room starts to blur around the edges, I swear I hear it again. That same ring. Sharp, ordinary, waiting. I suppose this is why I turned on the camera tonight. Not because there's something important to explain or anything wise to leave behind. Just a memory that never really stopped ringing. I was younger then. 42, maybe 43. It was late autumn, the kind of evening when the air gets thin and the trees start letting go of themselves. Back then, I lived in a narrow brick house on Whitaker Street. The place always smelled faintly like dust and coffee. I worked long hours at a printing shop downtown, and most nights I came home tired enough that the silence felt like a relief. That night was like any other. I remember setting my keys down on the kitchen counter. The clock above the sink said 7:18. The sky outside the window had already gone dark, and the streetlights were just beginning to hum. I poured myself a drink, nothing strong, just something warm to hold. And then the phone rang. It sat on the small table beside the couch, one of those beige landline phones with the long, curling cord. The first ring didn't bother me. Calls came in sometimes, wrong numbers, telemarketers, a coworker asking about a shift. The second ring stretched through the room. I remember glancing at it. Not annoyed exactly, just tired. There are strange moments in life when a person hesitates for no real reason. Nothing dramatic, nothing important. Just a pause where something small waits to be decided. That was one of those moments. The phone rang again, and I thought, maybe it'll stop. So I sat there. I took a sip from my glass and listened to it echo through the hallway. Fourth ring. Fifth. There's a particular sound phones make when they ring in an empty house. It fills the corners of the room differently than when people are moving around. It stretches longer somehow. I remember thinking I'd get it on the next one, but the next one came and went. And then there was a quiet space between rings that felt strangely comfortable, like the moment before rain finally falls. The phone kept ringing, not urgently, just patiently. I wish I could say I had some important reason not to answer it, that I was busy or angry or dealing with something serious. But the truth is, I was just sitting there. The room was warm, the drink in my hand had gone slightly cold. Outside, a car passed slowly down Whitaker Street, and the phone kept ringing. Eventually, it stopped, just like that. The silence afterward felt heavier than the sound itself. I remember noticing it right away, the way the house settled back into stillness. For a moment, I wondered who it might have been. Then I shrugged it off. I stood up, rinsed my glass in the sink, and turned on the television. Life has a way of moving forward quickly when you let it. Days passed. Work piled up. Orders at the shop needed finishing. Winter crept closer. The phone rang plenty of times after that night, but not that call. Not that particular one. I didn't think about it again for a long time. Not really. At least, until a few weeks later. That's when the letter arrived. It was waiting in the mailbox one gray afternoon when the sky looked like it might snow. The envelope was thin, my name written in careful handwriting I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, I just stood there holding it. Something about the way my name curved across the paper made my stomach tighten. You don't forget handwriting like that. even after 20 years. I remember walking back inside slowly. The house felt colder than usual that day. I sat at the kitchen table and turned the envelope over in my hands. There was no return address, just my name, Daniel Mercer. The stamp had been pressed slightly crooked in the corner. I opened it carefully, the way people do when they're not sure what they're about to read. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and at the top, a name I hadn't spoken out loud in decades. Emily. I hadn't seen Emily since we were both young enough to believe time would always wait for us. We met when we were 19. It's strange how clearly some things stay in your mind while entire years disappear. I can still picture the first time I saw her, the way she stood by the library window holding a stack of books like she might drop them if she moved too quickly. She laughed quietly, almost like she didn't want the room to hear it. For a long time, she was part of everything. Long walks through town after midnight, cheap coffee at a diner that never seemed to close, summer evenings sitting on the hood of my car watching people pass by. We were young in that careless way people are when they believe tomorrow will always arrive. But life shifts. People take different roads without realizing how far those roads might lead. Emily left town when we were 24, a job opportunity somewhere north. We said goodbye the way people do when they're certain they'll see each other again. Letters came at first, then fewer, then none. Years slipped past like pages turning quietly, and eventually her name became one of those things you carry without touching, until that letter arrived on my kitchen table. The paper inside was simple, just a few short lines, written in the same careful handwriting. I read them once, then again. My hands felt strangely cold by the time I finished, because near the bottom of the page, she mentioned something. A call she made. One evening in late autumn, she wrote that she wasn't sure if I was still living at the same number, but she tried anyway. She said the phone rang for a long time, long enough that she almost hung up twice, but she kept waiting, just in case. When I read that part, the room around me felt smaller somehow. My eyes moved back to the date she had written at the top of the page, and I felt something settle quietly in my chest, because the date matched that night exactly. The night I sat on the couch with a drink in my hand, listening, waiting, letting the phone ring. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading that letter. The light outside had already started to fade, that pale winter gray that makes everything look older than it really is. I remember folding the paper slowly and placing it back inside the envelope, even though there wasn't much written on it, just a few lines, nothing dramatic. Emily had always written that way, quiet sentences, careful words. In the letter, she didn't explain why she had called. She only said she had been thinking about the past more often lately, about the town, about certain people, about me. She wrote that she almost didn't dial the number, but something about that particular evening made her try anyway. And then she mentioned the phone ringing, how she sat there holding the receiver, listening to it echo in what she imagined was my empty house. She said she wondered if I had moved away, or if I was simply out somewhere living the life she had once known. And then there was one final line near the bottom. It was written smaller than the rest, almost like an afterthought. She said she waited until the phone stopped before she finally set the phone down. I read that sentence 3 or 4 times. Each time it landed a little heavier, because I could see that moment clearly. I knew exactly what the room looked like while she was listening to that phone ring. I knew the couch I was sitting on, the glass in my hand, the quiet pause between each ring where I thought
maybe the next one. The house felt different after that. You notice small things once a memory finds a place to sit inside you. The hallway seemed longer. The phone itself felt heavier somehow, like it had been waiting all those years to tell me something. I left the letter on the table that night. I didn't sleep very well. The next morning, I read it again. There was an address written on the back of the envelope, a town about 4 hours away, a place I had never visited. I thought about calling her. The idea stayed with me all morning while I made coffee that got cold before I finished it. Back then, you couldn't look people up the way you can now. If you had a number, you had it. If you didn't, you waited. I remember standing beside the phone for a long time that afternoon, my hand
hovering over the receiver. It's strange how the body remembers hesitation. The same quiet pause that kept me from answering her call weeks earlier came back again. I told myself I'd call later, after work, after dinner, after I had figured out what to say. But days have a way of filling themselves with small distractions, work, errands, the kind of ordinary noise that makes time move without asking permission. A week passed. The letter stayed on the kitchen table. Sometimes I'd pick it up and read it again. Other times I'd simply look at the envelope and feel that small weight in my chest. Another week passed, then another. Eventually, I placed the letter inside a drawer, not because I wanted to forget it, just because I wasn't sure what to do with it. Winter came fully that year. Snow along the sidewalks, the kind that turns gray after a few days. Life moved forward the way it always does. But every once in a while, usually late at night, I'd hear the phone ring in my memory again, and I'd picture Emily sitting somewhere far away, waiting through those same quiet seconds between rings. The strange thing about time is that it stretches in one direction and folds in another. Months slipped past before I finally picked up the phone. I don't remember the exact day anymore, only that the sky was clear and the air smelled like the beginning of spring. I had the envelope open beside me on the table. The address stared back like it had been waiting. I called the local directory in her town and asked if there was a number listed under her name. There was a pause on the line while the woman searched. Then she gave me the number slowly. I wrote it down on a piece of scrap paper. For a few minutes, I just sat there looking at it. The digits felt strangely important, like a small bridge between two versions of my life. When I finally dialed, my hand shook a little. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring sounded louder than it should have. Then someone answered, but it wasn't Emily. It was a man's voice, older, tired. I asked for her. There was a quiet pause on the other end, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before the words arrive. He told me Emily had passed away a few weeks earlier. A sudden illness. It had moved quickly, too quickly for most people to visit. I remember standing there with the receiver pressed against my ear, trying to understand what he was saying. He explained that he was her brother, that he had been sorting through some of her things, and that she had mentioned once that she had written to someone named Daniel. He asked if that was me. I said yes. He didn't say much after that, just that she had kept a few old photographs in a small box beside her bed. One of them had my name written on the back. We ended the call quietly. I set the phone back down on the table and sat there for a long time. The room looked the same as it always had. Same walls, same chair, same quiet house. But something about the air felt different, like a door had closed somewhere far away. In the years since then, I've thought about that evening more times than I can count. Not just the letter, not just the call I made too late,
but the sound of the phone ringing in that small living room on Whitaker Street. I can still see myself sitting there, glass in my hand, listening, waiting, letting one more ring pass before I moved. Back then, it felt like nothing, just a small moment in an ordinary evening. But sometimes life turns on moments that look exactly like that. Quiet ones, the kind you barely notice while they're happening. I'm 73 now. My house is smaller than the one on Whitaker Street. The furniture is older. The nights arrive earlier than they used to. The phone doesn't ring very often anymore, but every once in a while, usually when the room is quiet and the light outside has started to fade, I hear it again in my memory, that steady, patient ringing. And somewhere in that sound is a version of me who still has time to stand up, walk across the room, and answer it. If you've ever had a moment like that, one that stayed with you long after the room went quiet, you're welcome to sit here with me a while. Sometimes it helps just knowing someone else remembers too.